everyone. This is Linda again with our spirituality podcast, and I am thrilled and honored, really, to introduce today's guest, Father Ron Zanoni, who I was very blessed to have as a pastor for about 4 years when I was living in Boulder City. And now he's moved on to a much larger church, but he'll tell you a little bit about that. So I want to introduce Father Ron and first of all ask you to tell us a little bit about your background and how you became a priest and at what age you entered the seminary, because I think it's an interesting story. So Father Ron, it's all yours.
Well, thank you, Linda, and it's great to be with you and your listeners as well. Um, yeah, it's an interesting story. You can't make this stuff up, right? Um, I was born in Stockton, California, and I'm the third oldest. I tell people third oldest by 18 minutes of six children. My twin brother is a little older than I, so there's four boys, two girls. Um, my mother was born and raised in Stockton, which is about an hour south of Sacramento, hour and 50 minutes east of San Francisco in the Central Valley. And my dad was born in Chicago. All four of my grandparents immigrated from Italy in the northern province, the Trentino area. So I have that perspective of being from a Italian American family. I was born and raised Catholic. We went to church every Sunday, pretty faithful Catholic family, and went to the local Catholic schools, grade school, through seventh grade. And when I was about 9 years old, for some strange reason, after I'd received First Communion, I had this desire to go to morning mass, and the BBM sisters staffed our Catholic school there in Stockton, Church of the Presentation of the BVM. And they had morning mass in this little chapel, the convent. And I would get on my bike and ride to the chapel in the morning, go to mass. I remember those very peaceful moments, just a few lay people there at the mass and watching the priest celebrate mass and thinking to myself, I think I want to be a priest someday. So I do think that the seeds of a vocation started there. In fact, when they later renovated the church and tore the chapel down, they were selling pieces of the stained glass windows that were in the convent. So I bought one, or my parents actually gave me. So it reminds me of that time and perhaps gazing out those stained glass windows and thinking of a future as a priest. So I was pretty sure, but things happen in life, and as I got older, especially in my teen years, I sort of drifted from really that idea, that dream. I think I later thought, well, maybe I'll be a psychologist. I can help people that way. And but later in my teens and early 20s, as I said, it's really drifted away from the practice of my faith. I think I was always seeking, but didn't really think Catholicism, Christianity um, was really, didn't fit my more scientific way of seeing things. So after high school, I entered University of Pacific in Stockton and studied civil engineering for 3 years. Took a break. From that, I was sort of searching, didn't really know if I wanted to be an engineer, but it turns out I came back a couple of years later and entered uh, engineering school at Cal Poly in San Luis Obispo, California, and and graduated there in 1982, and then found myself accepting a job in Las Vegas, Nevada, of all places. I would have never dreamt I would have come to Las Vegas, but it was, people may remember there was a recession going on in 1982. And although at that time, if you were studying engineering, you were being told they'll be pounding your doors down for a job, but I couldn't find work. I was looking in Sacramento, not right in Stockton, but nearby. I just couldn't, no job offers were coming. But um, one day I dropped in at an interview on the campus of Cal Poly, um, the one of the vice presidents of Nevada Power Company here in Las Vegas was interviewing electrical engineers, but I was an environmental engineer, studying environmental engineering. He said, "Well, I'm not really here to interview your people in your major, but here's an application. Why don't you fill it out and send it in?" So I did that, and long story short, sent it into the company, and they called me and said they wanted to fly me out to Las Vegas for an interview. I'd never been on a commercial airline. It was a thrill. Came out to Las Vegas. I didn't know a soul in Las Vegas, and I had the interview. And from the very beginning, they were just really trying to talk me into coming. And one of the signs I look back on now is the secretary of the head of the department said to me when I met her that day for the interview, she recognized my last name, Zanoni. Said, "Oh, I knew a Father Silvio Zanoni." I said, "Well, that's my great uncle." So turned out Father Silvio actually helped to start an Italian Catholic Federation chapter here in Las Vegas. So I look back on that and say, oh, there's a little connection that was happening already. Again, I wasn't really practicing my faith, but that's why I ended up in Las Vegas. And um, over the course of the first couple of years, I mean, that was a great job. And I think God just put people in my life that helped to draw me back into my faith. And long story short, I started going back to church at a local Catholic church, and I really just things changed. I really had a deep desire to draw closer to God, to read the Bible. I got involved in lots of ministries in the parish at the time. And then this thought started to come back to me again about the idea of being a priest. And again, some of my journey really shapes, we'll talk a little bit more about this, my sort of idea, concept of what vocation is all about. Um, Long story short, I began a discernment process with the parish priest, and finally applied, and it was accepted to enter the seminary as a diocesan priest for the Diocese of Las Vegas, and entered in 1999. Went to St. Patrick's Seminary in Menlo Park, California, and was ordained in 2005, and have served in various parishes, including St. Andrew, as you mentioned, Linda. And I'm currently at Christ the King Parish in what's now the Archdiocese of Las Vegas. So that's kind of my journey of how I found myself becoming a priest. And again, as I mentioned earlier, I think maybe it was always there, but I was distracted, you might say, in certain ways in life. But I had to sort of rediscover that calling that, as I said, was probably was always there. And so it's been a great journey. I enjoyed the work that I had at Nevada Power Company as an engineer. I found it very stimulating, um, but being a priest now has been just a great joy and blessing.
I think you're so right about it being always there. I did something I have never done in all my years of being involved with the church. This summer, I volunteered to help with a youth group, and I have never worked with youth. I've always enjoyed working with adults in the church. But there was one young man who was in my group sitting right next to me, and he was probably about the same age you said you were, about 9 when he really, and I said, the second day I was there, I couldn't resist it. I said, you know, you're going to be a great priest someday. And he said to me, I'm thinking about it. And then later I met his mother, and she said, yes, he's talking about it. So I think it does usually come very early, but
Mhm.
I'm sure there are many cases where you're not quite sure. So that was really an interesting story. You mentioned that you were vocations director for the diocese for quite a few years, I believe. And I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about that experience, because I think that a lot of people think vocations only means vocations to the priesthood or the religious life. And I know in your work and in the book that we're going to talk about in a few minutes, You mentioned more about vocation. So can you kind of tell us about your experience as vocations director? What kind of situations did you run into, and what are your thoughts in general about vocations?
Mhm. Yes, so yes, I was appointed to be a vocation director for the Archdiocese, or what was still the Diocese of Las Vegas. I'm trying to remember now, it was 2016, I believe. Um, it's funny, I was part of the priest council, and we kept many of us priests said we really need to have a full-time vocation director, and it was one of those situations where everybody stepped back and I was left standing. So the bishop appointed me as a vocation director, which I was happy to do. It was very interesting and fascinating, and sort of naturally started to ponder and think about what does it mean to have a vocation, this whole spirituality of vocation. And our understanding, really, as Catholic Christians, is that everyone is called to vocation, first of all, to holiness. Okay. Everyone's called to not just mean piety, and it means really, to sum it up, to love God and to love our neighbor. We're all called to that vocation. But within that vocation of holiness, we're called to different states of life. And each of us is called to a vocation. It could be priesthood. It could be being a member of religious community, as a sister or brother. Of course, marriage is the most common, perhaps popular vocation. And then there is a vocation to the single life. So basically, it's a state of life through which you live out that primary call to holiness. And so I often emphasize that, and people appreciate it to hear that it isn't just priests and sisters that have a vocation. Everyone has a vocation, and each vocation has equal dignity through our baptism. Okay, so so that's what I often talked about when I would travel around in those first couple of years when I wasn't assigned to a parish. I made the rounds and preached at masses at all the parishes in the diocese a couple of times over those few years, initial years, and would talk about what vocation is all about. I later came to think that, realized, and part of this was from some reflection I heard from Father Mike Schmitz. He once talked about how even within our particular vocation, then we would be called to other things. So, for example, a married couple, when they're first married, their primary vocation, the primary way they live out that vocation is through their love of each other. That continues throughout their marriage. But when they have children, they're also called to live that out as a father and mother also. One might be called to a particular career, and that is often seen as a vocation, a calling, but their primary vocation would be their state of life, whether it be married or single or whatever. So we have particular callings that can change quite often during our lives, within our state of life, the primary vocation. And then I really came to understand that, if we think of vocation as simply God calling us to love, to respond to his love, and to love others, well, you could say that every day we have these mini callings, just based on the circumstances of our lives. Um, and God often comes to us and invites us to love in different ways. And that truly is him calling, through other people, and particularly people who may be in need. So that's kind of an overview of what I often talked about when I would travel around at parishes and also give talks about vocation, to give people a sense of that sort of all of life is vocation, being called and responding to God's goodness, God's love in our lives.
I think that's really interesting because I do find that when you mention the word vocations, people instantly think only of the priesthood and religious life, but there's so much more that we're all called to. And I know your parish is involved in helping people find their charisms. Do you find that that helps them also then identify their vocation?
It can. So our parish has been experimenting a little bit with um, the this program from the St. Catherine of Siena Institute that helps people to discover what they've identified through scripture, various scripture passages, some 24 charisms that we receive through our baptisms. They're gifts, simply gifts given to each person. And I do kind of think of our particular vocation as like that, although that's not listed as one of those 24 or so charisms, although celibacy is one of them.
Right.
Some are gifted with that call to celibacy. Um, so because perhaps primarily because of my own experience of believing that that vocation was probably there all along, that I kind of see our vocation in terms of that state of life to which we're called as something sort of planted into us, a charism. I've never really thought of it as particularly that way, but I do think it's like that. And then we don't create our vocation. In fact, I used to tell people we're not praying for more vocations because if God is doing God's part and planting these callings into his people, we're just really meant to pray for those who are already being called, already have that vocation to priesthood, a religious life in particular, that God will help them to discover it. So I know it might be a fine line, but I say we don't pray for more vocations. God's doing his part. We are praying for those who have that gift already, whatever. And so we want people to discover and to discern the particular vocation they have.
I remember that line being really sticking out in my mind as I was going through the book, which leads us to talking about the book that you have just released called Come Follow Me. And I wanted to just get to hear from you what prompted you to write this book and why did you think it was important? Because I know you do talk in there not only about vocations, but that's part of it that really struck me. So tell us a little bit about how you came to write Come Follow Me.
Well, the what of writing the book is more of a who because I'm looking at her. Linda, as you know, had a big part in this book coming about. When I was at St. Andrew, for our listeners, Linda often said she enjoyed hearing my homilies, and which is, priests are always gratified by that feedback. And when Linda decided to move away from Boulder City, I just put all my homilies on a thumb drive and said, Linda, here's a little gift. You can read my homilies for forever and ever. And Linda had already been telling me, you should write a book. You should write a book. And I mentioned this in the introduction of the book. I said, oh, that's all we need is one more book on homilies because there are many out there where people like myself have collected homilies over the years. Um, but Linda, you came back to me, I think within a few months after you moved and said, what do you think of this? So Linda had gone through lots of my homilies and sort of organized them in an interesting way by chapters with an overall theme of calling. So that's where we got the title, Come Follow Me. So Linda was really the book wouldn't have come about without you, Linda. Um, so I'm really grateful for that. And then Linda also added discussion questions at the end of each chapter, which are very helpful too. So people can not only read these homilies, um, but also uh, use it as a study guide if they wanted to have some group discussions too.
I think the study guide is really a good tool to have because a lot of people are looking for good books to discuss in book studies. I know in my church there are several people involved in different book studies, and that does make it a little bit easier because I think To me, I'm not a homilist at all, but to me, the point of being a homilist is that you want people to think about what this means in my life and what should I be doing to live out my vocation. So I think that's to me what really kind of stuck out about your homilies is it always prompted me to some kind of action, or at least to change something about my life. And that's, I think, what a good homily does. So I think anybody that picks up this book is going to get a great collection of homilies, but also, like you said, kind of organized into a story of the Good Shepherd and why it's important to follow. So, what is it that you hope people will gain after they read this book?
Yes. I was going to comment quickly before I answer that question, Linda, that the questions you came up with at the end of the chapters, I as I was reading them, I thought, oh, I should have asked that in the homily. That would have been a good question to prompt people to ponder. But that is a good technique, if you will, to lead people with a question, how to lead them to how do I apply this in my life so they can bring that word from the gathering from Mass to the world. Um, Now I forgot the question. It was,
What you hope that people will get after reading this book? What do you want
yeah,
people to take away from the book?
well, I hope people can maybe delve a little more into what we just talked about in terms of vocation, because some of the homilies that are in the book go into this in a bit more detail. Um, and that would be my, I guess, first hope is that people would just have a deeper sense that life is not random and God is always calling us, has a plan for our life. I know it sounds almost cliche, but God really does. And our lives are a mystery, but God is always leading us to something greater and calling us to be His instrument of goodness and love and to bring the gospel to others. So that would be my first hope. And then I think, especially again through the discussion questions, people could read these homilies. Homilies are always best within the context of liturgy, right? But perhaps by reading the selection of homilies and doing some reflection through the questions, that will help people to just deepen their spiritual life. Um, they are not, as I mentioned earlier, the homilies are not organized by liturgical season, but there is an index in the back. So, for example, if somebody wanted to have an extra reflection on a particular Sunday in the liturgical year, they could perhaps find it and go to that page in the book. So those are some of my hopes is that people would find it nourishing, find it helpful for their own spiritual life.
It's great. And I think that we all find God in different ways. And I know that one of the ways that you find God, in addition to serving as a priest, which is more than a full-time job, I always chuckle when people say, boy, those clergy people are lucky they only have to work weekends. And I think, do they realize what you guys put through putting together a homily and funerals and weddings and baptisms and going to see the sick? It's not an easy job. But I know one of the things that I think you do a lot is get out into nature and spend a lot of your time hiking in southern Nevada. Having lived there for 22 years, I know it's a beautiful place for hiking. A lot of people think when you think Las Vegas, oh, I don't like casinos, so I'm not going there. And um, in fact, I wrote a book called Beyond Las Vegas: Road Trips from A to Z, because there's so many wonderful things to see in southern Nevada and surrounding states. So, can you tell us a little bit more about your hiking adventures? And I know that you find God there, so maybe tell us a little bit about that.
I do. And I've always, I guess, had a love for the outdoors. I remember some wise advice from a priest mentor of mine that said that on your day off, you should do something completely different than what the normal routine is during the week. And so it could be it's just getting out of the usual environment. So I find just getting out to nature and doing some hiking is almost like as almost cleansing. When I first arrived in Las Vegas, I remember my future boss saying to me, well, if you like the outdoors, you're going to love Las Vegas. Now, I thought he was just pulling my leg because they wanted to get me to come. But I came to learn that there's an amazing beauty here in Southern Nevada. Um, where I grew up in California, you had to travel 2 or 3 hours to get to the Sierra Nevadas or to really have a setting where there was nice hiking trails and such. Here you can travel 20 minutes out of town and you're in Red Rock or you're in or a half hour or more and you're up in Mount Charleston area. So I came to learn that there's actually lots of opportunities for hiking in the whole area. And one of my classmates, who I was ordained with here in Southern Nevada, who also likes hiking, we made it a habit when we first were ordained that we should get together on our day off and kind of talk about our experience, how things are going with our priesthood. And we've been doing that now for 20 plus years and have hiked almost every trail you can think of here in Southern Nevada and still are discovering new ones. So there's a beauty of the desert that really, really grows on you. Um, so whether it's Red Rock or it's trails by the lake, um, up at Mount Charleston by Lake Mead, um, there's just lots of opportunities. And
You
it's
didn't
what
mention Valley of Fire. That's one of my favorite places. I'm sure you've been there many times.
Valley of Fire State Park is it's less than an hour, I think, out of town. It's like Red Rock on steroids.
Right.
It's a very beautiful place. Over the years, I've seen the popularity of a lot of these hiking areas growing and rock climbing and red rock bouldering. I think the internet and apps and like all trails have led to a lot of people discovering trails that were not really well known in the past. So it's nice to see that we like our visitors here in Las Vegas. We like them to make their deposit for the state treasury. But I find great joy in seeing people enjoying the other side of Las Vegas as well.
It's a good lesson. And I know that I think you have a passion for trees as I do, and just getting out into the trees and the woods and um, the mountains. And I, like you, just love the desert. I kind of hated leaving the desert. It was a little bit of a struggle for me to get used to, even though I grew up in Pennsylvania that was all green. But I said, I'll take the desert any day. It has a beauty of its own that you have to learn to appreciate. But before you go, I have one more question, and I almost dread asking you this but I ask it to all my authors: is what's next on your horizon? Is there going to be another book after Come Follow Me?
I don't know, Linda. That's a possibility. I mean, as I said, I happen to collect all my homilies. I save them on my computer, so there might be something there. Um, I mentioned earlier that we've been doing some discernment, a few of us in the parish, about charisms, and I am, I think, coming to understand that although we priests get up before often very large groups or a large group of people at mass every weekend, I find myself attracted to faith sharing groups as well. So I'd like to do a little more of that. I enjoy that setting of reflecting on the scriptures with other people, especially looking at the scriptures for the coming Sunday. I find that very life giving and uh, and a good way to deepen our understanding of the scriptures. So I'd like to do a little more of that. I do like to read certain things. So there's a lot of, for example, as we speak, Pope Leo just came out with his first teaching, an apostolic exhortation. I have loved you, I think is the title in English. I just love reading things like that. I wish I had a little more time to to read some of these teachings of the church and maybe summarize them and put together some presentations. I wouldn't mind doing a little more of that in the future. Um, but just the day-to-day life of parish life is what I love. So that's what's next. The next
Uh,
Tom, the next.
One other quick question. You mentioned that your dad was from Chicago. So did he ever meet Pope Leo or did you?
Oh, I have a great story to tell about. So, I mentioned earlier that our family is Italian American, Italian by background. So my dad's very proud, as I am, of our heritage. So he said to me before the Cardinals went into the recent conclave, they've got to elect another Italian. He said. And so my dad is from Chicago. So when Pope Leo was elected, he'd never met uh, Pope Leo, but I said, Dad, you didn't get your Italian, although I think Leo has some Italian heritage. He said, I did. You didn't get your Italian, but you got someone from Chicago, where you're from. He's a White Sox fan like you, and his name's Bob too. My dad laughed. So he didn't get his Italian Pope, but yeah, but it checked all the other boxes.
Right, that's great. Well, I'm also looking forward to reading that encyclical. I guess it wasn't an encyclical, but I'm eager to read it when I have time too. But when you're in busy, right? I think I'm working on 4 books at the moment. So when I take a break from writing, I have to get in and read that. But
I think it's one of your charisms, Linda, writing.
well, I was going to ask if that was one of yours that came up because when I did my study, writing did not surprise me. It came up as one of my top charisms. How did writing come up in your list?
It was not, honestly, it was high on the list. Um,
Uh, well,
uh,
you're good at it though. I urge everybody to really pick up the book. I think you'll really enjoy it. It's a book that I think will help everybody reflect on what we are all called to be, and we're all called to follow the Good Shepherd. And the opening chapter is really was I think the homily that inspired me to tell you you need to write a book because it was all about I won't give it away too much. I have to get the book to read it, but it's all about a man who finds out that the sheep really do know their shepherd's voice. It's not just an allegory. They actually physically know their shepherd's voice. And I think that's what this book is all about, that we all learn to listen to God's voice. So I just want to thank you for the time that you were able to give us. And even though it's your day off, we appreciate that. So we're going to let you get back into nature as soon as you possibly can. But do you have any final closing thoughts for anyone?
yes, Linda, thank you again for the opportunity, and thank you for all your work on this book. You said I was a good writer. Well, I had a good editor. That was you. Thank you for that. And I'm glad you brought up that point. There is a fascinating story about shepherds and sheep actually knowing their shepherd's voice. The one piece of advice I always um, gave to guys, especially, or anyone who's trying to discern their vocation, is to stay close to the shepherd.
Hmm.
Because I think that is part of why I stopped hearing that call to the priesthood, my vocations. I drifted from Jesus. And so as we draw close to Jesus and really seek to know his God's will and to seek to hear, not audibly, but to hear God's call, then we can have that assurance that we're taking the path that God has for us. And so that's the single most important piece of advice, whether it's the big callings in life or even the so-called lesser callings, to stay close to Jesus, to be able to to follow where he's leading.
Thank you so much. And I definitely encourage everyone to pick up this book because if you don't get to Las Vegas to hear Father Ron's homilies in person, you can at least read them. And we're so glad that you did write them all down because otherwise they would be, just kind of lost to many people if they aren't there to hear you in person. But I want to again thank you. You've been such a gracious guest, and I look forward to the next book. I really do. I think you have more in you. You don't probably want to hear that. I told Father Ron early on in this process, writing the book is easy. Getting it published is the challenging part, and marketing it and doing everything else. That's the challenging parts of it that we writers don't want to spend time on. We just want to write, write, write. So, but I think there's going to be another book coming. But pick up this one and you won't regret it, I promise. So thanks again, Father Ron.
Thank you, Linda.